The sun beat down on the sprawling backlot of Paramount Studios, baking the fake brick walls and painted backdrops that made up the bustling set of Viva Las Vegas, baby. It was supposed to be another smooth day of filming for the latest Elvis Presley vehicle, a lightweight musical romp filled with catchy tunes and even catchier dance numbers. Leo, a 20-year-old assistant prop master, felt the familiar hum of the production, a mix of nervous energy and creative chaos in his bones. He was currently wrestling with a stack of oversized cardboard dice, each one big enough to be a small ottoman. "Careful with those, Leo," barked Mr. Henderson, the director, a man whose patience was as thin as his remaining hair. "Those are for the grand finale. They need to sparkle." Leo's sweat already beading on his forehead despite the early hour, grunted an affirmative. He loved his job truly. It was a whirlwind of glitter, glue, and improbable requests, but being surrounded by the magic of movies, especially with a legend like Elvis Presley, just steps away was a dream come true. He adjusted his glasses, which were perpetually sliding down his nose, and tried to look as competent as possible. Today was particularly important. Elvis himself was on set, not just for a quick cameo, but for a full day of shooting. The buzz around the lot was electric. Elvis, or the King, as everyone reverently called him, was known for his charm, his talent, and, occasionally, his unpredictable spontaneity. Leo finally got the dice stacked in the precarious pyramid near the entrance of the soundstage. He checked his clipboard. Prop inventory, giant dice, check. Replica guitar, check. Feather boas, 3 dozen, check. Animal abo. Just as he finished the thought, a pristine white trailer pulled up, not far from Elvis's own luxurious mobile dressing room. The door opened and out stepped Clara, a no-nonsense animal handler with a stern bun and an air of quiet authority. In her arms, perched comfortably on her shoulder, was Barnaby. Barnaby wasn't just any monkey. He was a professional, trained for years to hit his marks, snatch props, and look adorable on cue. Today, his big scene involved stealing a hot dog from a vendor and chattering comically as Elvis chased him through a bustling street market. It was a simple gag, but a guaranteed laugh. "Good morning, Leo," Clara said, her voice surprisingly soft as she patted Barnaby's head. The monkey, no bigger than a well-fed house cat, blinked his intelligent brown eyes at Leo, then let out a tiny, inquisitive chirp. He had a tiny custom-made sequined vest for his scene, which shimmered even in the faint morning light. "Morning, Clara, Barnaby, ready for your close-up?" Leo chuckled, reaching out a tentative finger. Barnaby sniffed it, then delicately grasped it with his tiny, surprisingly strong hand. "He's been a little restless this morning," Clara confessed, adjusting her grip. "Must be the energy of the set. He's usually unflappable." She gestured towards Barnaby's travel cage, a sturdy, padlocked affair made of reinforced mesh. "I'll get him settled in his cage near the set. We don't want him getting overstimulated before his big scene." Just then, a roar went up from the main soundstage. "Elvis is here. Everybody quiet down." The King himself strode out of his trailer, looking every inch the superstar. He was wearing a sky blue leisure suit, perfectly tailored, with a wide-open collared shirt that showed off his chest. His hair, meticulously styled, gleamed under the sun. He flashed a dazzling smile, waved a hand, and the crew, who had been bustling just moments before, collectively froze, mesmerized. "All right, folks, let's make some movie magic," Elvis boomed, his voice smooth as velvet. Carrying across the lot, he caught sight of Clara and Barnaby. "Well, look at that. Our little co-star. He's a handsome fellow, isn't he?" Elvis ever. The charmer walked over, a playful glint in his eye. He reached out a hand towards Barnaby, who, instead of flinching, let out another curious chirp. "What's his name, ma'am?" "Barnaby, Mr. Presley, but please don't. He's very sensitive to new faces," Clara began, her voice tinged with a nervous edge. She tried to pull Barnaby closer to her, but the monkey, suddenly emboldened by the star's presence, made a swift, unexpected lunge. In a blur of motion, Barnaby leaped from Clara's shoulder, not at Elvis, but past him. He landed with surprising grace on the oversized cardboard dice Leo had so carefully stacked. The pyramid wobbled precariously. "Barnaby! No!" Clara cried, lunging forward. Elvis, surprised, instinctively reached out to steady the dice, but it was too late. Barnaby, seeing an escape route, launched himself from the toppling dice. Soaring through the air like a tiny furry acrobat, he landed squarely on Elvis's meticulously coiffed hair. A collective gasp went up from the crew. Elvis froze, his famous smile replaced by a look of bewildered shock. Barnaby perched atop his head, let out a triumphant squeal, then, with a mischievous flick of his wrist, snatched a pair of Elvis's signature aviator sunglasses right off his face. With the glasses clutched in his tiny hands, Barnaby launched himself again, this time towards the nearby prop cart. He bounced off a pile of fake fruit, scattering them across the ground like Technicolor marbles, then disappeared around the corner of the soundstage, leaving a trail of startled gasps and one very bewildered. "Rockin' you!" Leo stood frozen, mouth agape, staring at the empty space where Barnaby had been. The oversized dice lay sprawled on the ground, and a single, perfectly sculpted banana, one of the props for the street market scene, rolled to a stop at his feet. Elvis, slowly, gingerly, reached up to touch his now disheveled hair. "My sunglasses," he murmured, his voice a low, disbelieving rumble. Then a slow, deep chuckle started in his chest, growing into a full-blown laugh. "Well, I'll be that little fella's got some spunk." But Clara was already in motion, sprinting after the escaped primate. "Barnaby, get back here, you naughty monkey." Leo stared at the banana at his feet, then at the scattered props, and finally at Elvis, who was still chuckling, albeit with a slight frown of concern. This was not going to be a smooth day. This was going to be pure chaos, and Leo had a very bad feeling. He was going to be right in the middle of it. The hunt for Barnaby the Capuchin had officially begun. The moment Barnaby vanished, the set transformed from an orderly, if bustling, work pace into a scene of bewildered pandemonium. Clara, despite her earlier composure, was yelling Barnaby's name, her voice echoing off the temporary facades. Leo, shaking off his initial shock, scooped up the banana at his feet. It was a prop, perfectly ripe-looking but made of plastic. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a lure. "He went that way," Leo shouted, pointing towards the alleyway between the soundstage and the costume department. Elvis, still looking remarkably suave, despite his ruffled hair, joined the chase. "After him, boys. We can't have our little star running off with my good shades." He grinned, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. Production delays were expensive. The alleyway was a maze of stacked lumber, discarded set pieces, and various discarded props. Barnaby, with his agility, had a distinct advantage. Leo, Clara, and a couple of bewildered crew members stumbled after him, their footsteps echoing. Suddenly, a loud crash came from ahead. Elvis exclaimed, a mix of amusement and horror on his face. "My lucky hairspray!" "Barnaby, drop it!" Clara pleaded, cautiously approaching. "That's not a toy!" But Barnaby seemed to think it was the most fascinating toy in the world. With a mischievous glint in his eyes, he aimed the can and pressed the nozzle. A cloud of super-hold hairspray blasted out directly, hitting a bewildered grip standing below. The man spluttered, his face instantly stiffening into a mask of surprise. "My face, it's like concrete." The grip wailed, frantically trying to wipe the sticky residue off. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Director Henderson's voice boomed from the soundstage entrance. He had finally caught up, his face a thundercloud. "What in the blue blazes is going on out here? We're on a tight schedule, people. The monkey, sir. He escaped." Leo stammered, feeling a sudden surge of responsibility for the chaos. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "The monkey, Barnaby? The one we paid a fortune for. And he's got Elvis's hairspray. This is a disaster." Barnaby, seemingly enjoying the attention, chattered louder. Then, with another flick of his wrist, tossed the hairspray can onto a pile of prop fruit. It bounced, sending apples and oranges rolling in every direction. Then, with a playful squeal, he launched himself off the columns, swinging from an overhead pipe like a tiny Tarzan. "He's going into the prop shed," Clara shouted, picking up her pace. The prop shed was a treasure trove of movie magic and a potential nightmare for a runaway monk. It was crammed floor to ceiling with everything from antique furniture to futuristic gadgets, all organized, or so Leo had once believed, into a system only he truly understood. They burst into the shed, eyes scanning the dim interior. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. "Barnaby," Clara called out softly. Suddenly, a cascade of fabric came tumbling down from a high shelf. It was a pile of vibrant sequin capes, the very ones Elvis was supposed to wear in his grand finale. Numbers. Barnaby appeared at the top of the shelf, grinning, one of the capes wrapped around him like a superhero. "He's playing dress-up," Elvis chuckled. "Despite the situation, looks good in sequins, doesn't he?" Barnaby, still holding the cape, spotted something else that caught his eye. A towering display of prop cakes built for a wedding scene. They were made of foam and icing, but looked deliciously real. "No, not the cakes," Leo gasped. He knew how fragile they were before anyone could react. Barnaby leaped. He landed in the middle of the top cake, sinking slightly into the fake frosting. He then proceeded to scoop up a handful of the white foam, liberally smearing it across his face like a mischievous child. "Oh, for the love of," Director Henderson groaned, clutching his head. Clara moved quickly, trying to corner him. Barnaby was having too much fun. He grabbed a handful of fake frosting and with surprising accuracy flung it at Clara. It splattered right on her forehead, leaving a white splotch on her perfectly coiffed bun. Clara blinked, then let out an exasperated sigh. Leo, seeing his chance, remembered the plastic banana in his hand. Barnaby paused, his eyes fixed on the yellow object. He seemed to hesitate, his small head cocked to the side. For a moment, Leo thought he had him. Then Barnaby let out a high-pitched titter of laughter. He reached into the cake, pulled out a small plastic wedding topper of a bride and groom, and with a swift flick of his wrist, launched it directly at Leo. It bounced off Leo's forehead with a soft thud, then fell to the ground. Before Leo could recover, Barnaby, still wearing his sequined cape, grabbed a handful of the plastic grapes from a nearby prop basket. He then launched himself out of the prop shed through a small open window, leaving a trail of discarded grapes in his wake. "He's headed for the dressing rooms," Clara yelled, wiping the frosting off her face with her sleeve. Elvis, who had been watching the whole scene unfold with a growing grin, clapped his hands together. "Well, that fella's certainly got a mind of his own. This is almost more entertaining than shooting a scene." Leo, however, didn't find it quite so entertaining. His head throbbed slightly where the wedding topper had hit him, and he was covered in a fine dusting of fake cake crumbs. He glanced at the director, whose face was now a deep shade of crimson. This was turning into a very, very long day. The great banana heist, or rather the great fake banana rejection, had only just begun. The dressing room hallway was a riot of color and discarded clothing, a temporary home for the movie's many dancers and extras. Barnaby, agile and swift, zipped down the corridor, his tiny sequined cape still trailing behind him like a superhero's. The sound of his chattering echoed in the relatively quiet space, quickly drawing attention. "He went this way," Clara panted, skidding to a halt. Leo was right behind her, followed by Elvis and a surprisingly winded director. Henderson, the first dressing room they peered into, was a disaster. It belonged to the lead showgirls. Wigs were askew on their stands, makeup brushes lay scattered like fallen soldiers, and a cloud of glittering powder hung in the air. Barnaby was nowhere to be seen, but a trail of tiny muddy paw prints led deeper into the room. "Oh, no," Leo groaned. He knew the chaos a monkey could cause in such a delicate environment. Suddenly a loud shriek came from the next room. They rushed to the door, finding it slightly ajar. Inside, a terrified dancer was balanced precariously on a chair, her eyes wide with fear as Barnaby swung playfully from a chandelier above her head. He was wearing a feathered boa like a scarf and was batting at a string of pearls which had clearly been snatched from her vanity table. "He's got my pearls," the dancer cried, barely daring to breathe. Clara, ever practical, tried to reason with the monkey. "Barnaby, sweetie, come down now. Those aren't yours." Barnaby, invigorated by the chase, simply let out another mischievous chitter. He swung higher on the chandelier, causing it to creak ominously. Then, with a playful flick, he tossed the string of pearls. They landed with a clatter in a nearby makeup kit, scattering tubes of lipstick and compacts. "Get him," Director Henderson bellowed, forgetting his usual decorum. "We need those pearls for the Casino Royale scene." Elvis, seeing an opportunity, decided to try a different approach. He stepped forward, putting on his most charming, crooning voice. "All right, there, little fella, come on down. No need to cause a fuss. We can work this out. Just you and me." He held out a hand. "Palm up, écu." For a moment, it seemed like he might actually respond to the king's famous charisma. Then, with a burst of renewed energy, Barnaby swung from the chandelier, landing directly on a rack of costumes. He slid down the silk dresses and sequin jackets, creating a ripple of fabric, and then launched himself onto a vanity table. There, he spotted a large, fluffy powder puff. Before anyone could stop him, Barnaby grabbed the puff and with surprising speed hurled it directly at Elvis's face. The powder exploded on impact, leaving a perfect white circle around Elvis's nose and mouth, as if he'd just face-planted into a giant marshmallow. A ripple of suppressed giggles went through the gathered crew. Elvis blinked a cloud of powder drifting around him, then let out a sputtering cough. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, wiping his face with his hand, leaving a streaky white smear. "That's certainly a new way to get a facial." Clara, trying to contain her own amusement, lunged for Barnaby, but the monkey was too fast. He leaped off the vanity table, landing on the floor, and darted under a pile of discarded costumes. "He's under the clothes," Leo yelled, pointing. Everyone rushed forward, bending down to try and spot him. Director Henderson, in his haste, tripped over a pair of oversized clown shoes that had been left in the hallway for a different production. He went down with a surprised yelp, landing squarely in a laundry basket full of freshly pressed shirts. His bald head emerged from a sea of crisp white cotton, looking utterly disheveled. Clara, meanwhile, had spotted Barnaby's tail peeking out from under a sequin showgirl gown. She tried to grab it, but Barnaby, with an unexpected burst of strength, yanked the gown, pulling it over Clara's head. She let out a muffled exclamation as she became entangled in the sparkling fabric. Stumbling blindly, Leo, seeing the chaos, had an idea. He remembered a prop that was often used to calm animals on set. A small, squeaky rubber chicken. He sprinted back to the prop cart, hoping it was still there. He found it buried under a pile of fake flowers. Clutching the chicken, Leo ran back to the dressing room. Clara was still wrestling with the showgirl gown, and Henderson was trying to untangle himself from the laundry basket, muttering curses under his breath. Elvis, still covered in powder, was attempting to comb his hair with his fingers, making it even more unruly. "I've got an idea," Leo announced, holding up the rubber chicken. He squeezed it. Squeak! Barnaby, who had been about to make a break for the hallway, froze, his head cocked to the side. "Curious," Leo squeaked it again. "Squeak!" The monkey's eyes lit up. He clearly found the sound intriguing. He chattered excitedly. Then, with a playful leap, he darted out from under the clothes and snatched the rubber chicken right out of Leo's hand. Victory! Leo thought. He'd caught him, but Barnaby didn't stop there. He simply squeaked the chicken. He launched himself out of the dressing room, disappearing down the hallway and towards the main soundstage. "He's got the chicken," Leo yelled, feeling a fresh wave of despair. "He's going for the soundstage." Clara finally disentangled herself from the gown, looking exasperated. Director Henderson emerged from the laundry basket, looking like he'd just survived a tornado, and Elvis, still powdered, just shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Well, that's one way to get a monkey to take your props," Elvis quipped, then sighed. "All right, team, let's get our little feathered friend before he starts directing the movie himself." Leo looked at his hands, which now had a sticky residue from the rubber chicken. He glanced back at the mess in the dressing room, then ahead at the looming soundstage. He knew what awaited them there. More chaos, more slapstick, and probably a very, very loud scene. The soundstage was a cavernous space, usually bustling with activity, but currently standing in a state of suspended animation. Bright lights hung from the rigging, illuminating a meticulously constructed set. A vibrant, bustling Las Vegas casino, complete with prop slot machines, roulette tables, and a raised stage for Elvis's big musical numbers. The moment Barnaby, still clutching the squeaky rubber chicken, scampered onto the set, he seemed to sense the grandness of the stage. He let out a triumphant squeal, echoing in the vast space, and immediately headed for the rows of empty slot machines. "Barnaby, no!" Clara yelled, her voice filled with a desperate plea. She knew how valuable and sensitive the props could be. Theo, Elvis, Director Henderson, and the rest of the ad hoc monkey catching squad followed, entering the soundstage like a line of nervous explorers. The crew members already inside, technicians, camera operators. Stagehands turned to stare their faces, a mixture of confusion and amusement. Barnaby, meanwhile, had discovered the slot machines. With a surprising amount of strength for his size, he yanked on a lever. The prop reels inside spun wildly, then clunked to a stop, displaying a row of cherries. Barnaby chittered in delight, then pulled another lever, and another. Soon the entire row of slot machines was ringing with a cheerful, if slightly off-key, jingle of winning jackpots. "He's playing the slots," Elvis exclaimed, a genuine laugh escaping him. "Look at him go. He's going to break them," Director Henderson wailed. He scampered off the slot machines, heading directly for the raised stage. On the stage, a full band of prop instruments was set up. Drums, guitars, a shiny brass saxophone. Barnaby's eyes lit up. He leaped onto the drum kit. First, he bounced on the bass drum, sending a thumping sound reverberating through the stage. Then he grabbed a drumstick and with surprising rhythm started banging on the cymbals, creating a cacophony of metallic crashes. "My ears," someone shouted from the crew. Clara, Leo, and Elvis tried to approach from different angles, hoping to corner him. But Barnaby was a master of evasion. He darted off the drums, sliding down a microphone stand, then leaped onto a prop guitar. He plucked a string, producing a twanging sound, then swung the guitar around, narrowly missing a camera operator's head. "Watch the camera," the operator yelled, ducking. Director Henderson, meanwhile, had spotted the rubber chicken, which Barnaby had dropped near the saxophone. He bent down to pick it up, thinking he could use it to lure the monkey. But as he straightened up, he bumped into a microphone stand which toppled over, sending a microphone directly into a cymbal, creating an even louder crash. Barnaby, startled by the noise, leaped onto the saxophone. He stared at it, intrigued by its shiny surface. Then, with a sudden burst of inspiration, he inserted the rubber chicken into the bell of the saxophone. "No, no," Clara cried. Realizing what he was doing, Barnaby blew into the mouthpiece. The squeaky chicken, trapped inside the bell, produced a distorted, honking squawk that sounded like a dying duck. It was an awful, ear-splitting sound, but Barnaby seemed to think it was hilarious. He honked it again, then again, parading around the stage like a tiny, deranged musician. Elvis, despite the chaos, couldn't help but crack up. "Well, I never... a musical monkey?" "This isn't a comedy, Mr. Presley. This is a serious production. And our lead prop is ruining the instruments." Clara, seeing that Barnaby was now distracted by his new instrument, made a bold move. She tried to creep onto the stage, hoping to snatch him. But as she stepped onto the polished surface, her foot slipped on a discarded prop. "Banana peel." She went down with an undignified squawk, landing with a thump amidst the pile of prop sheet music. The sheet music flew into the air like startled birds, fluttering down onto the stage. Barnaby, momentarily stopping his saxophone honking, stared at Clara then. At the scattered sheets, he seemed to find her plight, a must to help her up. "Are you okay, Clara?" "Fine. Just banana peel," she grumbled, rubbing her hip. As they were distracted, Barnaby, still holding the honking saxophone, darted off the stage. He spotted the intricate set of tables and chairs arranged for the casino scene. With a mischievous glint, he began pushing over the chairs one by one, creating a domino effect that sent them clattering across the set. "He's wrecking the set design," the set decorator yelled, horrified. Elvis, seeing that all conventional methods were failing, decided to take matters into his own hands. He had a sudden spark of inspiration. "All right, everybody, stop the chasing. He likes music, right?" Elvis said, pointing at Barnaby, who was now gleefully honking the saxophone inside a prop poker table. "And he's got my shade, so he obviously has taste." Elvis paused, then flashed his signature. Green picked up a prop guitar that hadn't been touched by Barnaby yet. He strummed a few chords, then, to the astonishment of the entire crew, began to sing. His voice, rich and powerful, filled the soundstage, a soulful, bluesy tune, completely off script for the movie. Barnaby, inside the poker table, immediately stopped honking. His head popped up, his eyes wide, captivated by the sound. Elvis, seeing his tactic was working, continued to sing, walking slowly towards the poker table, his voice weaving a spell. Kept his eyes on Barnaby, who was now slowly, cautiously crawling out from under the table, mesmerized. Leo watched, utterly captivated. It was a surreal sight. The king of rock and roll, covered in powder, singing an impromptu ballad to a mischievous monkey holding a saxophone with a rubber chicken stuck in it, while surrounded by a demolished movie set. Just as Elvis got close, Barnaby, still holding the sax, reached out a hand, not to surrender, but to gently tap one of the guitar strings. He seemed to want to play along. "A duet, huh? Little fella." Elvis chuckled, but before the moment could last, Director Henderson, who had finally freed himself from the laundry basket and was now covered in white shirt, decided to make his move. He saw his chance. He lunged. Henderson yelled, tackling the poker table instead of the monkey. Table, being a prop, promptly collapsed into a pile of plywood and painted fabric, trapping Henderson underneath. Barnaby, startled by the sudden commotion, let out a terrified screech. With a final desperate honk of the saxophone, he launched himself into the air over the collapsing table and through a nearby open window leading out to the backlot. He was gone, leaving only the sound of Elvis's startled strumming, Director Henderson's muffled curses, and the general bewilderment of the crew. "Well, that's one way to end a song." He looked at Leo. "Any ideas where he's off to next, son?" Leo glanced at the window, then at the scattered instruments and the trapped director. "Lunch break," he mumbled, a new, terrible thought dawning on him. "He's probably headed for the commissary." The studio commissary was usually a sanctuary, a place where tired crew members could grab a quick bite, gossip, and escape the controlled chaos of the sets. Today, however, it was about to become the epicenter of an entirely different kind of chaos. Leo, Clara, and Elvis, leaving the bewildered Director Henderson to be extricated from the rubble of the poker table, sprinted towards the commissary. The aroma of fried chicken and stale coffee wafted through the air, and a faint chattering sound confirmed Leo's fears. Barnaby had indeed found the food. They burst through the swinging doors to find a scene that instantly stopped them in their tracks. Barnaby, still sporting his sequined cape, was perched atop the main serving counter, an entire platter of donuts spread out before him. He had already taken a bite out of at least half a dozen, leaving a trail of powdered sugar and jelly smears in his wake. A line of disgruntled crew members, their lunch trays clutched tightly, stood frozen in disbelief. The commissary staff, usually unflappable, were staring wide-eyed at the tiny destructive chef. "Barnaby, get down from there!" Clara pleaded, her voice cracking with exhaustion, but Barnaby seemed to be having the time of his life. He grabbed a jelly donut, took a huge bite, and then, with a mischievous grin, squeezed it, A jet of red jelly squirted across the room, splattering onto the pristine white uniform of the head chef. "My uniform," the chef bellowed, his face turning beet red. "He's making a mess of the food." A stagehand cried. Elvis, ever the quick thinker, saw an opportunity. "All right, little fella, if it's food you want, we've got plenty." He gestured to a nearby fruit bowl full of fresh bananas. "Come on down. We'll share." He grabbed a banana, peeled it with a flourish, and held it out. This was a real banana, Leo noted, not a prop. It had to work. Barnaby's eyes fixated on the banana. He seemed torn between his sugar-frilled donut rampage and the fresh, appealing fruit. He chattered excitedly, then launched himself from the counter, landing right in the middle of a lunch table laden with trays. Chaos erupted. Trays clattered, food splattered. A plate of spaghetti and meatballs went flying, showering a group of extras, dressed as Roman centurions. A pitcher of iced tea tipped over, drenching a sound engineer's pristine white shirt. Barnaby, seemingly oblivious, scrambled across the table, knocking over salt shakers and condiment bottles. He reached the banana Elvis held out, snatched it with a lightning-fast movement, and then, with a burst of agility, leaped onto a nearby dessert cart. "He's going for the pies!" a server shrieked. The dessert cart was piled high with cream pies, fruit tarts, and a magnificent three-tiered chocolate cake. Barnaby, his eyes gleaming immediately, went for the chocolate cake. "No, Barnaby, not the cake," Clara cried, knowing the sheer mess a monkey could make with a sticky, creamy cake. But it was too late. Barnaby plunged his hands into the soft, rich frosting, then proceeded to smear it across his face and his beloved sequined cape. He looked like a tiny, very satisfied, chocolate-covered monster. "He's enjoying this way too much." Elvis chuckled, despite the growing chaos. He shook his head, then noticed a broom leaning against the wall. "All right, boys, let's try a pincer movement. Clara, you go left. Leo, right. I'll take the front." We corner him. The three of them, navigating the slippery, food-strewn floor, began to advance on the dessert cart. Leo, trying to be careful, slipped on a glob of mashed potatoes and nearly went down, regaining his balance just in time. Clara narrowly avoided a flying bread roll. Barnaby, sensing their approach, suddenly darted behind the dessert cart. They heard a series of bumps and thuds. "What's he doing?" Leo whispered. Suddenly, the dessert cart burst forward, pushed by Barnaby from behind. It rolled rapidly towards a row of tables where the stunt team was having their lunch. The cart, laden with its sugary cargo, crashed into the first table, sending plates, cutlery, and startled stuntmen flying. A chain reaction began. Table after table collapsed, sending food and people sprawling. The commissary erupted into a full-blown food fight, albeit an accidental one. Spaghetti, salad, mashed potatoes, and gravy flew through the air, raining down on everyone. Elvis, caught in the crossfire, managed to duck under a table, narrowly avoiding a flying meatball. Clara got a faceful of cream pie. Leo, trying to shield himself, found himself covered in a sticky mixture of fruit salad and gel. Barnaby, meanwhile, emerged from the wreckage of the dessert cart, looking completely unruffled, still clutching his half-eaten banana. He surveyed the pandemonium he had created, then let out a triumphant chitter, a sound that seemed to say, "And for my next trick," he spotted a high shelf filled with loaves of bread. With a single agile leap, he launched himself upwards, landing perfectly amongst the soft, pillowy loaves. He grabbed a fresh loaf, pulled off a piece, and began to munch on it, looking down at the chaos below like a king on his throne. Director Henderson, who had finally been pulled from the poker table and had arrived at the commissary, took one look at the scene, the food-covered crew, the monkey happily eating bread on a high shelf, and simply threw his hands up in despair. "That's it," Henderson shrieked, his voice hoarse. "That's enough. Production is halted. We are not filming another frame until that monkey is caught." A collective groan went up from the crew. No filming meant no pay, or at least a major delay. The mood, which had been mixed with amusement, now shifted to frustration. Elvis, still under the table, slowly crawled out, wiping cream pie from his immaculate blue suit. He looked at the chaos, then up at Barnaby, who was innocently munching his bread. A strange look crossed Elvis's face, not annoyance, but a sort of grim determination. "All right, everybody," Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the din. "Let's clean this up, and then we catch our little friend together." Leo looked at the king, then at Clara, who was now resignedly wiping pie from her face. This wasn't just about a monkey anymore. It was about getting the movie back on track. And Leo knew, deep down, that this monkey wasn't just causing trouble. He was somehow bringing everyone together, even if it was through sheer, unadulterated slapstick. He picked up a stray French fry and decided this was going to be a very long afternoon. With Director Henderson's decree of a production halt echoing in their ears, the crew, grumbling but united, began the arduous task of cleaning up the commissary. But even as they scrubbed floors and righted tables, their eyes were constantly scanning for Barnaby. He, however, was long gone from the commissary, having spotted an open vent leading directly into the sprawling costume department. It was a treasure trove of fabrics, sequins, and sartorial delights, and for a mischievous monkey, a playground beyond imagination. Leo, Clara, and Elvis, along with a few dedicated crew members, arrived at the costume department to find the chaos already in full swing. The main room, usually a paragon of organized fashion, was now a whirlwind of color and texture. Barnaby, still with his chocolate-smeared cape, was swinging from a rack of sequined Elvis jumpsuits, sending them spinning like dazzling pinwheels. "He's in the jumpsuits," a costume designer shrieked, clutching her head. "Those are custom-made, dry clean only." Barnaby, seemingly understanding her distress, let out a joyful shriek and pulled one of the jumpsuits off the rack. He tried to put it on, but it was comically oversized. He ended up tangled in the flared legs and wide collar, looking like a tiny, struggling, bejeweled ghost. "He's trapped," Leo exclaimed, seeing an opportunity. Clara moved cautiously. "Just relax. We'll get you out." But Barnaby, despite his predicament, was still a clever monkey. He managed to wriggle free from the jumpsuit, sending it flying toward the mannequin wearing a delicate ballroom gown. The jumpsuit snagged on the mannequin, pulling the gown off with it, leaving the mannequin standing naked and somewhat scandalous. Then Barnaby leaped onto a nearby hat rack. He grabbed a top hat, placed it jauntily on his head, then pulled a feather boa from a pile and draped it around his neck. He looked like a miniature, very debonair gangster. "He's got style, I'll give him that," Elvis mused, a reluctant smile playing on his lips. "He's got our inventory list. That's what he's got," the costume designer wailed, pointing to a clipboard Barnaby had just snatched. Chattered as he flipped through the pages, occasionally tearing one off. Leo noticed Barnaby was headed for the wigs. Oh no, not the wigs. They're impossible to restyle. Too late. Barnaby landed in the middle of a table piled high with an assortment of wigs, blonde bouffants, beehives, sleek black bobs. He picked up a bright pink wig, put it on his head, then grabbed a long blonde wig and used it like a lasso. "Swinging at a rodeo, Barnaby," Clara yelled, trying to grab the swinging wig. She lunged, but Barnaby, with a burst of energy, swung the blonde wig and accidentally snagged it around Elvis's head. The wig, thick and voluminous, instantly enveloped Elvis's face, completely blinding him. "Whoa, what in the I can't see?" Elvis cried, stumbling blindly. He reached up, trying to pull the wig off, but it was surprisingly tangled around his hair. Leo and Clara rushed to help Elvis, carefully untangling the long blonde strands from his perfectly coiffed hair. Elvis emerged, looking more bewildered than angry, his hair a wild mess of blonde and black. While they were distracted, Barnaby, still wearing the pink wig and top hat, scampered onto a sewing machine table. He pressed a pedal, and the sewing machine whirred to life, its needle furiously stitching air. Barnaby seemed fascinated, watching the needle bob up and down. Suddenly, a loud crash came from another section of the costume department. They all spun around. A large, rolling clothes rack filled with what appeared to be heavy medieval costumes had toppled over. From beneath the pile of velvet cloaks and chainmail, a muffled voice cried out, "Help! I'm trapped!" It was Director Henderson, who, determined to catch the monkey himself, had apparently decided to explore the costume department alone. He was now thoroughly pinned under a pile of Renaissance-era gowns and a particularly heavy prop sword. Barnaby, seeing the commotion, decided to investigate. He scampered over to the fallen clothes rack, still wearing his pink wig and top hat, looking utterly adorable. He peered at the trapped director. Then, with a single swift motion, snatched Henderson's monocle right off his face. "My monocle," Henderson spluttered, trying to reach out from under the fabric. "That's a collector's item." Barnaby, now with a pink wig, a top hat, a feather boa, and a monocle, looked like a truly eccentric gentleman. He chattered happily, then began to climb the toppled clothes rack, using the heavy fabrics as handholds. He was aiming for a high shelf filled with bolts of shimmering fabric. "He's going to unravel everything," the costume designer wailed near tears. Clara, seeing the danger to the expensive fabrics, made a desperate plea. "Barnaby, please, think of the satin." But Barnaby seemed to ignore her. He reached the top of the shelf and, with a triumphant tug, pulled down a massive bolt of bright red silk. The silk unrolled, flowing downwards like a scarlet waterfall, completely engulfing Clara. She was instantly lost in a sea of luxurious fabric. Only her muffled shouts audible. Leo, seeing the opportunity, noticed a large, empty laundry hamper. He knew monkeys were curious. Maybe he could lure him into it. He grabbed a leftover prop banana and the squeaky rubber chicken from his pocket. "Barnaby, look!" Leo squeaked the chicken, then held out the banana. Barnaby paused, looking down from his perch. He had the monocle in one hand, the pink wig slightly askew. He considered the banana, then the chicken, then Leo. With a sudden, bold move, he dropped the monocle, which clattered to the floor. Then he let out a joyful shriek, grabbed the entire bolt of red silk that had trapped Clara, and swung it like a rope, launching himself over the heads of the startled crew members. He was headed for the open loading bay doors at the far end of the costume department, a direct path to the vast open backlot. "He's headed outside," Elvis exclaimed finally, free of the blonde wig, and now looking determined. "He's going for the outdoor sets." Leo groaned. From the enclosed chaos of the costume department to the sprawling mock-up cities and gardens of the backlot, this was going to be an even bigger chase. And he had a feeling Director Henderson, still trapped under a pile of medieval costumes, was going to be even less pleased. The backlot of Paramount Studios was a sprawling, surreal landscape. One moment, you were in a bustling New York street. The next, a quaint European village, then a dusty Wild West town, and finally a lush tropical jungle. This was Barnaby's new playground, and he was taking full advantage of it. He burst out of the costume department, still trailing a significant length of red silk from the bolt he'd snatched, and wearing his pink wig and top hat. He looked like a tiny, flamboyant explorer on a grand adventure. "He's in the Wild West town," Leo yelled, pointing towards the dusty wooden facades and saloon doors. Clara, having finally extricated herself from the silk, joined the chase, her face streaked with exhaustion and a renewed sense of determination. Elvis, looking remarkably composed despite his wild hair, was right behind them. Director Henderson, now freed from the medieval costumes but missing his monocle, emerged from the costume department looking utterly beside himself. Barnaby, with a mischievous chitter, zipped through the saloon doors. They heard a clatter inside, followed by a chorus of surprised yelps. They burst in to find him on top of the bar, batting at a row of prop whiskey bottles, sending them crashing to the floor, not the vintage props. The set dresser wailed. Barnaby, unconcerned, snatched a prop cowboy hat, donned it over his pink wig, and then leaped onto the swing doors, riding them back and forth like a tiny rodeo champion. He was having the time of his life. Hanging on a wall, grinned. "All right, little fella, let's see how good you are at dodging a rope." Grabbed the lasso, twirled it expertly, and cast it towards Barnaby. The lasso sailed through the air, remarkably accurate for an amateur. It landed perfectly around Director Henderson, who had just entered the saloon, still muttering about his lost monocle. He was instantly hog-tied, tumbling to the dusty floor with a grunt. "My leg, I think it's a cramp," Henderson bellowed, completely tangled. Elvis winced. "My apologies, Henderson. A little rusty with the rope." Barnaby, seeing the commotion, darted out of the saloon, headed for the nearby tropical jungle set. This area was filled with artificial trees, hanging vines, a small murky pond, and a variety of prop animals. "He's going to get lost in there," Clara exclaimed, picking up her pace. "The jungle set is enormous." They entered the jungle to find Barnaby already swinging from a fake vine, letting out playful hoots and hollers. He looked perfectly at home amidst the plastic palm trees and exotic foliage. He landed on a giant prop crocodile, which thankfully wasn't real. He's plated to pull on its tail. He's playing with the crocodile. Leo yelled, a strange mix of fear and admiration in his voice. Suddenly, Barnaby spotted something truly enticing. A prop treasure chest, left open and filled with piles of fake gold coins. He immediately dropped the cowboy hat, the pink wig, and the top hat and dove into the chest, scattering coins everywhere. He scooped up handfuls of the shiny plastic gold, chattering with delight. "He's found the treasure," Elvis chuckled, shaking his head. "Always knew that fella had good taste." Clara saw her chance. She crept through the fake foliage, trying to get behind the treasure chest. Leo, seeing her plan, tried to create a distraction. He spotted a prop water gun shaped like a pirate pistol. He picked it up and squirted a stream of water towards Barnaby. The water gun, however, was old and misfired. Instead of a stream of water, it let out a pathetic dribble, then completely broke, spraying water all over Leo's face. He sputtered, wiping his eyes. Barnaby, momentarily distracted by the water, looked at Leo, then at the broken water gun, then at the treasure chest. He then reached into the chest and pulled out a fistful of gold coins. With surprising force, he flung them at Leo. Plastic coins rained down on him, bouncing off his head and shoulders. "Ow!" "These things are harder than they look," Leo yelped, rubbing his head. While Leo was under attack, Barnaby leaped out of the treasure chest and onto a nearby prop canoe which was floating in the murky pond. He began to paddle furiously with his hands, sending ripples across the water. "He's taking the canoe!" Clara cried, rushing to the edge of the pond. But as Barnaby paddled, the canoe, being a prop, sprung a leak. Water began to seep in, and the canoe slowly started to sink. Barnaby, realizing his vessel was failing, leaped from the sinking canoe just in time, landing with a splash in the middle of the pond. He emerged from the murky water dripping wet, his fur plastered to his body. He looked utterly pathetic, no longer the triumphant explorer, but a soaked, shitting Barnaby's plight felt a pang of sympathy. "He's cold. Get him out of there, quick," Clara, despite her exasperation, reached out her hand. "Come on, Barnaby, it's all right. Just come to Clara." Barnaby looked at her, then at Elvis, who was also extending a hand. He was shivering, and his earlier bravado seemed to have vanished. He chattered softly, a small, sad sound. Just as he seemed about to move towards Clara, Director Henderson, having finally untangled himself from the lasso and now covered in dust, decided to make his grand entrance. He spotted Barnaby vulnerable and wet in the middle of the pond. "Aha! Got him now!" Henderson roared, seeing his chance to finally end the chase. He charged towards the pond, holding a large fishing net he'd somehow acquired. He swung the net with all his might, aiming for the shivering monkey. Barnaby, startled by the sudden loud charge, panicked. With a burst of desperate energy, he scrambled out of the pond, not towards Clara or Elvis, but directly towards Henderson. He leaped onto the director's chest, scrambling for purchase, then used Henderson's head as a springboard, launching himself over the man's shoulders. Henderson, unprepared for the monkey's counterattack, stumbled backward. He tripped over a fake lily pad, lost his footing, and plunged headfirst into the murky pond with a mighty splash. He emerged, sputtering, his face covered in algae and his hair plastered to his head. Barnaby, meanwhile, had used the momentum to launch himself high into the air. He landed on a high branch of a fake tree, shook himself off, sending water droplets flying, and then, with a final triumphant chitter, He disappeared into the dense artificial canopy, heading towards the looming backdrop of a fake cityscape. Elvis sighed, running a hand through his now wet hair. Well, that fella's got more moves than me. He just put on a whole show out here. He looked at the sputtering director in the pond, then at Leo and Clara, both looking utterly defeated. All right, team, last leg the city. Leo looked at the fake cityscape, then at his own drenched clothes. This was turning into an epic soaking wet slapstick epic. The mock cityscape, usually a backdrop for grand cinematic moments, now felt like a desolate urban jungle. Towering, painted buildings, fire escapes leading nowhere, and fake street lamps stood eerily quiet. The only sound was the distant splashing of Director Henderson, still trying to extract himself from the jungle pond. Barnaby, having found refuge in the cityscape, was nowhere in immediate sight. He had used the opportunity to dry off, perched high on a painted rooftop, observing the chaos he had caused. "Where is he now?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from all the yelling. She, Leo, and Elvis stood at the entrance to the cityscape, eyes scanning the fake windows and rooftops. "He's a clever one," Elvis mused, hands on his hips. "That fella knows how to vanish." Suddenly, a frustrated roar echoed from behind them. Director Henderson, finally out of the pond and looking like a drowned rat, stomped into the cityscape. He was soaked, covered in pond scum, and utterly livid. "This is unacceptable," Henderson bellowed, his voice vibrating with rage. "We've lost half a day's filming. This little menace has cost the studio a fortune. If he isn't caught by nightfall, I'm going to have him replaced with a CGI monkey, or a stuffed animal, or a mime. You assistant prop master, you were responsible for the animals. This is all your fault." Leo flinched. The accusation stung, even though he knew it wasn't entirely true. He felt a lump in his throat. He had tried his best, but Barnaby was just too clever, too fast. Clara, however, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, Barnaby is an animal. He's stressed, and he's never done anything like this before. It's not Leo's fault. It's just a very unusual situation." Henderson scoffed. "Unusual? It's a catastrophe. I have producers breathing down my neck. We're filming a musical, not a monkey chase. My reputation is on the line." He paced back and forth, muttering, "A CGI monkey. Yes, that's it. Less trouble." Elvis, seeing Leo's dejected face, put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Now hold on, Henderson, this ain't nobody's fault. That little fella's just full of beans, and frankly," he winked at Leo, "he's put on quite a show, better than some of the scenes we got in the can already." Henderson glared at Elvis. But the king's charm was hard to resist, even in his current state. "Humor, Mr. Presley, is not going to get this movie made." Suddenly, a faint meow echoed from a nearby alleyway within the cityscape. They all froze, listening. Another meow, louder this time, followed by a pathetic whimper. It sounded like a cat in distress. Barnaby, who had been hiding on a rooftop, suddenly appeared on a nearby fire escape. He looked towards the source of the sound, his head cocked. His usual mischievous glint was replaced by a look of concern. He chattered softly, then, to everyone's surprise, he began to descend the fire escape, not with his usual playful abandon, but with a cautious, almost invective air. They rounded the corner into a dark, narrow alleyway, where discarded props and empty boxes lay scattered. There, huddled in a corner, was a tiny, scrawny kitten, its fur matted, shivering and whimpering. It looked lost and terrified. Barnaby approached the kitten slowly, cautiously. He lowered his head, nudged the kitten gently with his nose, then let out a soft, reassuring chitter. The kitten, startled at first, slowly uncurled, looking up at the monkey with wide, fearful eyes. Then, to their utter astonishment, Barnaby reached out a tiny hand and gently, delicately patted the kitten's head. The kitten, still wary, leaned into the touch, letting out a faint purr. Barnaby then let out another soft chitter, as if comforting it. He looked up at the group, then back at the kitten as if asking for help. Everyone watched in stunned silence. The mischievous, chaotic monkey, the cause of so much slapstick and frustration. "Well, I'll be," Elvis murmured, his voice soft. "He's a softy at heart. Clara had tears in her eyes. "Oh, Barnaby, you found a friend." Director Henderson, for once, was speechless. His anger seemed to drain away, replaced by a look of profound surprise. Leo, seeing the scene unfold, felt a warmth spread through him. All the frustration, all the mess, all the running around, it suddenly felt worth it. Barnaby wasn't just a prop or a nuisance. He was a living, feeling creature, capable of unexpected tenderness. He noticed a small crumpled piece of paper lying near the kitten. He picked it up. It was a note hastily scrawled. "Found kitten. Couldn't keep. Please help." Barnaby chittered again, then gently nudged the kitten towards Clara. The kitten, seeing Clara's outstretched hand, hesitantly crawled towards her. Clara knelt down, scooping the tiny creature into her arms, stroking its head. The kitten purred louder this time, rubbing its head against her hand. Barnaby, seeing the kitten safe, seemed to relax. He scampered back up the fire escape, but this time he wasn't fleeing. He was simply moving to a higher vantage point, watching them. Director Henderson, still a bit stunned, cleared his throat. "Well, all right, I suppose we can't fault the creature for having a heart." He even managed a faint, if still grim, smile. "But we still need to catch him, and we need to get back to filming." Leo looked up at Barnaby, who was now calmly observing them from the rooftop. This wasn't just about chasing a monkey anymore. It was about understanding him, maybe even befriending him. And Leo had a growing suspicion that Barnaby, in his own chaotic way, had just taught them all a valuable lesson. The discovery of the kitten had shifted the mood on set. The crew, now aware of Barnaby's softer side, felt less like angry pursuers and more like concerned kindivers. Director Henderson, while still stressed, had softened his stance considerably. He even allowed the kitten, now named Mittens by Clara, to stay in a warm box with a bowl of milk. "All right, people," Director Henderson announced, having wiped off most of the pond scum and retrieved his monocle. "We have a new plan, a strategic plan, a final grand finale, attempt to bring Barnaby in, and we will do it humanely." The plan was elaborate, concocted by Henderson, Clara, and even Elvis, with input from Leo. It involved luring Barnaby to a central location on the main soundstage. They would set up a safe zone with his favorite fruits and a cozy, warm blanket, and then gently usher him into his reinforced travel cage. Chosen location was the Love Me Tender. Set, a quaint, romantic gazebo surrounded by fake flowers. They set up the cage, carefully disguised with vines and flowers near a pile of delicious-smelling bananas, grapes, and even a miniature prop hot dog. It's his reward after good scenes. Elvis, meanwhile, had another idea. "Music," he declared. "The fella likes music. Remember how he reacted when I sang? We play his favorite song, something soothing, something that makes him want to come home." They settled on a gentle, old-fashioned lullaby that Clara sometimes hummed to Barnaby. A small portable record player was set up ready to play. Leo's job was crucial. He was to act as the primary lure. He was to carry a trail of prop bananas, leading Barnaby towards the gazebo. "Remember, Leo," Clara instructed, "slow and steady. Don't make any sudden movements. Let him come to you." Leo nodded, clutching his string of fake bananas. He looked at the empty soundstage, the set bathed in soft, inviting light. This felt like a trap, but a gentle one. Barnaby, however, was still hiding somewhere high in the rafters of the soundstage, observing everything. With his sharp, intelligent eyes, he had seen the commotion, the careful setup. He was smart. Is he going to fall for it? Elvis wondered, looking up at the shadowy ceiling. "He's a monkey, Mr. Presley, not a mind reader," Henderson grumbled, though even he sounded more weary than annoyed. Suddenly, a tiny inquisitive chitter echoed from above. Barnaby appeared, swinging from a lighting rig. He saw the bananas, the music player, the warm blanket. Leo, following Clara's instructions, slowly began to lay down a trail of bananas, one by one leading towards the gazebo. Barnaby watched, his eyes fixed on the fruit. Then the lullaby began to play, soft and melodic, filling the vast soundstage. Barnaby seemed to respond. He chittered again, a softer sound, and began to descend slowly, cautiously along a rope. He landed on the set, his tiny paws patting softly on the fake grass. He sniffed the air, then spotted the first banana, picked it up, peeled it, and began to eat, his eyes still fixed on Leo. "He's coming. He's coming," Clara whispered, her voice filled with hope. Barnaby followed the trail, taking small, deliberate steps, eating each banana. He was closer, closer to the gazebo. Leo held his breath. This was it. Just as Barnaby reached the entrance of the gazebo, taking the last banana from the trail, decided to give a preemptive signal to the stagehands who were meant to gently close the cage. Once Barnaby was inside now, Henderson whispered a bit too loudly, gesturing broadly. The stagehands, hidden behind a prop bush, mistook his signal. Thinking he meant to launch the next phase of the plan, they accidentally triggered a spring-loaded prop tree that was supposed to pop up in a later scene. With a sudden whoosh, the prop tree sprang to life, a giant fake palm tree unfolding with a loud mechanical whir right next to the gazebo. It was completely unexpected. Barnaby, terrified by the sudden noise and movement, shrieked. He dropped the banana and in a flash launched himself out of the gazebo. He didn't run away, he ran up. Elvis, seeing Barnaby high above them, sighed. "Well, that's just perfect." Barnaby perched high on the painted clouds, looked down at them, chittering furiously, clearly agitated. He was out of reach and more scared than ever. Clara, however, noticed something different about Barnaby's chattering. It wasn't just fear. It was a frantic, agitated sound. He was looking at something. She followed his gaze. High above them, near the rafters, a frayed electrical wire was sparking intermittently, dangerously close to some hanging drapes. It was a genuine hazard, unnoticed in the chaos. Barnaby wasn't just scared of the tree, he was trying to warn them. Pointed with a tiny finger towards the sparking wire, chattering even more frantically. "He's trying to tell us something," Leo realized. "Look! Up there! The wire!" Everyone looked up, their eyes following Barnaby's frantic pointing. The sparking wire became terrifyingly apparent. A fire could break out, endangering the entire set, and everyone on it. "Fire hazard!" Elvis shouted, his voice suddenly grave. "Henderson, get the fire marshal. Everybody, stand back." Barnaby, seeing they understood, let out a relieved chitter, but he wasn't done. With a burst of incredible bravery, he leaped from the painted backdrop, swinging from a nearby rope, and landed on the catwalk high above the wire. He grabbed a loose piece of fabric that was dangerously close to the sparking wire and yanked it away. Then used his body to create a barrier between the wire and the wooden beams, effectively preventing a potential fire. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the small monkey, who had caused so much slapstick chaos, now became an accidental hero. He held his position, chittering until a crew member with a fire extinguisher arrived and safely put out the spark. Barnaby, exhausted but triumphant, looked down. He saw the fire marshal giving a thumbs up, saw Clara looking at him with awe, saw Leo smiling, and even director Henderson looking less angry and more simply amazed. Elvis, seeing Barnaby's brave act, felt a surge of respect. He walked over to the portable record player, changed the record, and this time he didn't just play Barnaby's lullaby. He picked up a prop guitar and began to sing. Not just for the monkey, but for the entire awestruck crew. It was a soulful, heartfelt rendition of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Barnaby, high above, listened. He looked at the gathered group, his human friends. He looked at the safety of the set below, no longer menacing. He looked at Elvis singing just for him. And then, slowly, calmly, Barnaby the Capuchin began to descend. He didn't run, he didn't leap. He simply climbed down, step by careful step, towards the familiar, comforting sound of Elvis's voice. He wasn't being chased, He was coming home. As Elvis's voice filled the soundstage, weaving a gentle spell, Barnaby continued his slow descent. He reached the ground, his pink wig slightly askew, his sequined cape still draped over his shoulders. He walked directly towards Elvis, who continued to strum the guitar softly, his eyes fixed on the small primate. Barnaby stopped at Elvis's feet, looked up at him, then let out a soft, almost affectionate chitter. He reached up with a tiny hand and gently touched Elvis's polished shoe, a gesture of trust. Elvis stopped singing, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. He knelt down, extending his hand slowly. "Well, hello there, little fella. Looks like we finally got you." Barnaby sniffed his hand, then surprisingly climbed onto Elvis's knee. He curled up, letting out a contented sigh, resting his head against Elvis's chest. He seemed utterly exhausted and finally safe. Clara, tears in her eyes, rushed forward. "Barnaby, oh my brave boy." She gently scooped him up from Elvis's knee, cradling him in her arms. Barnaby snuggled into her, closing his eyes. Director Henderson, still a bit damp from the pond, cleared his throat. "Well, He looked at Barnaby, then at the sparking wire that had been safely extinguished, and he saved the set, and potentially our entire production. He actually managed a small, appreciative nod. The crew erupted in cheers and applause, not just for Elvis singing, but for Barnaby the unlikely hero. Leo felt a surge of pride. All the slapstick, all the chaos had led to this moment. He walked over to Clara. "He's really something, isn't he? He truly is. He just needed to feel safe and maybe needed a little adventure." Later that day, after Barnaby had been safely returned to his freshly cleaned and stocked cage, now equipped with extra padding and a special toy banana, the atmosphere on set had completely changed. Tension was gone, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared experience. Director Henderson, remarkably, was calmer than he had been in days. He even cracked a joke about getting Barnaby a stunt double for future rescue scenes. Elvis, for his part, made sure Barnaby had a prime spot on set, near the catering and away from any potential mischief. He'd even taken to visiting the monkey between takes, bringing him special treats. Barnaby, in turn, seemed to have developed a fondness for the king, often reaching out to touch his hair, much to Elvis's amused exasperation. "He likes my pomade, I swear." Elvis would grumble good-naturedly as Barnaby pawed at his perfectly styled hair. The movie Viva Las Vegas, baby, resumed filming. Barnaby, far from being replaced, had actually earned himself a new unplanned scene. Director Henderson recognized the unexpected charm of the monkey's heroics, wrote in a quick shot of Barnaby, now wearing a tiny fireman's helmet, giving a triumphant chitter at the end of a musical number, hinting at his accidental heroism. Leo, who had felt so much pressure earlier, found himself enjoying his job even more. He'd learned a valuable lesson about unexpected heroes, about staying calm in chaos, and about the hidden depths of character, even in a mischievous monkey. He had also, surprisingly, found a new friend in Clara, who seemed to have shed some of her sternness, and now shared knowing glances with him whenever Barnaby did something particularly funny. One afternoon during a break, Leo found himself sitting near Barnaby's cage, watching the monkey play with a new squeaky toy. Mittens, the kitten Barnaby had rescued, was curled up asleep on a soft blanket inside Clara's trailer, now a permanent fixture on set. Elvis walked by on his way to his next scene, still in his glittering show costume. He stopped, looking at Barnaby, then at Leo. "You know, son," Elvis said, his voice thoughtful, "that little fella taught us all something. Sometimes the biggest adventures and the best lessons come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the heroes aren't the ones on the screen, but the ones running around behind it, or even swinging from the rafters." He winked at Leo. "You handle yourself well, kid. You've got guts and a good heart." Leo blushed, feeling a warmth spread through him. For being blamed for the chaos to being praised by Elvis Presley, it had been quite a journey. Barnaby, as if understanding, chittered softly from his cage. He reached out a tiny hand towards Leo, and Leo, without hesitation, offered his finger. Barnaby grasped it gently, his small, warm hand a comforting presence. The movie set, once a place of strict order, now felt like a slightly more chaotic but infinitely more human place. Chase had been pure slapstick, a symphony of pratfalls, flying objects and bewildered expressions. But beneath the layers of pie and hairspray, a heartwarming story had unfolded, of unexpected friendships, of recognizing bravery in unlikely places, and of finding joy and connection amidst the beautiful madness. And Leo knew with a certainty he hadn't possessed before that this was just the beginning of many more adventures on the set of Viva Las Vegas, baby.